Last time we spoke, folks, we were talking about post-Reconstruction South, right? We got to the idea that because of what's happening in the South, conditions are bad for blacks. Jim Crow laws are segregating. The KKK are trying to take away their rights. You also have black codes. But this wasn't good enough. We wanted to make sure that blacks couldn't vote. So what's one of the laws that we passed to prevent blacks from voting? The literacy test is first. Literacy test said what? You got to be able to read and write to vote. Then, of course, you have the poll taxes. And what do the poll taxes say? You had to pay to vote. Why would this be difficult for blacks? Most of them were poor. Oh, why would the literacy test be bad for blacks? Yeah, they weren't educated or couldn't read and write while they were slaves. And last, the grandfather clause. And the grandfather clause said what? If your grandfather couldn't vote, you can't vote. If your grandfather can't vote, you can't vote. So the idea was in hopes of making sure that blacks could not vote. But could some claim that their grandfather could vote? Oh, well, I'm half black, half white, so I could vote, actually. So ultimately, if you could get past the literacy tests, if you could get past, the racist sheriff, if you could get past the poll taxes and the KKK and the grandfather clause, well, we'll just lynch you. So either way, folks, it becomes fairly problematic. Whereas if you're white at this time, you just vote pretty easily. Most never made it through. Not in the first few years. Again, remember, after the grandfather clause is out.
Approximately how many people made it?
I wouldn't know, but very few. Very few. I don't have a number for that. In any case, folks, because the conditions in the South were so poor, many decided to leave, and so you have the rise of the exodusters. The exodusters were Southern blacks who decided that the South was terrible for them, and they decided to move west. So the exodusters were those who moved west. The root word of exodusters, by the way, is exodus, which just means what? To leave. Exodus means to leave. Okay? Questions there? Everyone good? On exodusters, blacks who moved west. Again, in hopes of having better conditions, voting rights, whatever else. But are they still going to be racist in the West? Unfortunately, yes. Everyone good?
Was it better in the West?
Was it better? It depends on where. If you moved out west and your farm failed, no, it was worse. It just depends. Anyway, folks, let's talk about ethnic conflicts in the West then. Ethnic conflicts in the West. Specifically, we're talking about California. You see, folks, between 1849 and 1880, over 75,000 Chinese moved to California. Over 75,000 Chinese moved to California. That's a lot in that time period. Especially going from very few to 75,000. Now, why did they come? What are the two reasons why they came? Gold rush is one. They also came to help build what? They were looking for jobs. They wanted to help build what? The railroads. Very good. So from 1849 to 1880, 75,000 Chinese moved to America, to California specifically, for the gold rush and for the railroads. Now, many of them made their money and they left, but many remained. And when they stayed, they would take all the low-paying jobs. So many of these Chinese took low-paying jobs. Servants, they would work as laundrymen, cooks, whatever else, but they would take low-paying jobs. And who's not too happy about this? The other common whites. And so a man by the name of Dennis Kearney, this guy, Dennis Kearney was upset because these Chinese were what? Taking away their jobs. It was job competition. So Dennis Kearney and his group known as the Kearneyites, Dennis Kearney and the Kearneyites, they're not very creative with their names, they decided to attack and harass Chinese immigrants for taking their jobs. So they began to attack and harass Chinese immigrants for taking their jobs. And you have this mini civil war, a race war of sorts, occurring in California at this time. Again, they have this race war, this mini race war going on, where they begin to attack and harass Chinese immigrants. Oftentimes what they would do is they would take the Chinese by their ponytails and cut them off, which is a huge insult because those ponytails were a sign of honor, submissiveness to the Chinese emperor. So it was a huge insult to have your ponytail cut off. But other times they wouldn't be so delicate. Instead of just cutting off the ponytail, they would actually scalp them. They would take a knife and scalp it all off. And if they didn't scalp them, sometimes they would just straight up kill them. But it got very, very violent in California between the Chinese and the Kearneyites because they were upset about them taking their jobs. Now, does the United States want California to erupt into this race war? No. So, because the Chinese were being attacked by all these Kearneyites, eventually the U.S. passed a law called the Chinese Exclusion Act. And what the Chinese Exclusion Act did was it banned Chinese immigration to the U.S. You know, because they were the ones being attacked. Hey, there's too many Chinese being attacked. We should have them stop coming to America. That'll solve the problem. Because that's the problem. It's not the fact that the other guys are racist trying to take away their jobs and kill them. It's because there's too many Chinese in America. That's the issue. So the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 banned Chinese immigration to the U.S. Let me be clear, this is not deportation. People assume that we deported Chinese. No. This just means no more Chinese can come into America. But if you're already here, what? You get to stay. Let me make that clear. A lot of people misinterpret this as we kicked out all the Chinese. No, that's a deportation. This is an exclusion act. Something you should note, folks, this is the only time in American history in which we said your people can't come to this country. No other time have we done that. We've said we want to limit the amount of people from this continent or this region, but we've never singled out in one country and said, your people can't come here. We've never done that except for the Chinese. And just so you know, folks, the Chinese Exclusion Act lasts until 1943. In 1943, the Chinese Exclusion Act is lifted. And the only reason why we lifted... What's happening in 1943, folks? World War II. So why might we have lifted the Chinese Exclusion Act during World War II? Yeah, because China's our ally during World War II. So we can't have these terrible relations with our allies. So because China's our ally during World War II, we lift the Chinese Exclusion Act ban. Another fact that you guys might want to know is that when the Chinese came to America, they had a hard time making money because they would be kicked off their gold mines and whatever else. But many Chinese actually became very wealthy starting laundry services. They made tons of money doing the white man's laundry because they would get their clothes dirty and someone had to clean them. And the Chinese opened up all these laundromats and they made crazy money with laundry services. They're not the ones who started them, but they opened up many of them and they made tons of money. They actually made more money than most gold mines. Because in a gold mine, you made like a little bit at a time. But then there, they just had to stay there and the gold would come to them. Like, oh, I need to clean my clothes. Here's some gold. It picked up over time. So laundry services, they made a lot of money. Something else you might want to know, there was a Supreme Court case later on, you have to know about it, where many Californians wanted to take away citizenship from the Chinese, even if they were born in America. Because 14th Amendment said what? You're a citizen of what?
If you were born
If you're born here, regardless of race, creed, ethnicity, gender. But what happened was that many whites wanted to strip Chinese of their citizenship, even if they were born in America. They wanted to take that away. And so luckily what ends up happening is that in Supreme Court case, they rule that no, you can't do that, because the 14th Amendment guarantees all Americans the right to citizenship, which is a pretty important case, but you'll learn about that later. Anyway, let's talk about party patronage and political corruption, a.k.a. the spoil system. So party patronage is the same as a spoil system, and it's pretty much political corruption. Let me explain. The Republican Party. We're talking about the Republican Party here. The Republican Party was split up into two factions or two groups. Two factions or two groups. One faction was the half-breeds, led by James Blaine. The other faction of the Republican Party were the stalwarts, led by Roscoe Conkling. So pretty much you have a party divided between these two groups, the half-breeds and the stalwarts. Good so far? Okay. Well, what ends up happening is that James Blaine of the half-breeds, he wants to be in a position of power so that when he appoints people to different government jobs, what kind of people is he going to appoint into office? Other what? Other half-breeds. Whereas if Roscoe Conkling is in charge, he's going to appoint who into government positions? The stalwarts. The idea is like this, folks. If James Blaine is up top, then he's going to appoint half-breeds, and they're going to appoint half-breeds, and they're going to appoint half-breeds, and they're going to appoint half-breeds. And is that going to give them a lot of influence throughout the government? That's the idea. Whereas the stalwarts, they want the same thing. The stalwarts want to appoint stalwarts throughout the government. And the reason they want to do this, folks, is really for two reasons. Number one, power and money. It's about power and money. If my half-breed guy is in charge, do I, as a half-breed at a lower level, still have more power than a stalwart now? Yeah. That's the idea. Imagine if there was a committee to decide how to fund school sports programs. And so there were the baseball team and the football team are competing to get on that committee. So would the baseball players want more baseball players on their committee or football players? Baseball, and vice versa. Because if the baseball players dominate the committee, then they'll put baseball players in all the other mini committees, and will the baseball players get what they want? And the same will happen to football. So that's the basic idea. Party patronage. The half-breeds want power, the stalwarts want power, and really they want all the bribes that comes with running the government. Good so far? Okay. There was a group in the middle, by the way, that did not want to get involved because really they saw this system as corrupt. You're just giving jobs to your friends, right? That group in the middle that was uninvolved, they were known as the mugwumps. The mugwumps. Yes, and the phrase I always hear is, this sounds like Harry Potter. You have the muggles and the mugwumps and the half-breeds and the stalwarts. You're like wizards and whatever else. No, just people. We're all muggles. All muggles. Fun fact, I've never seen or watched Harry Potter in my life.
No way. What? Me too.
Never read or watched. I know lots about it just because of pop culture stuff, but I know Daniel Radcliffe is Harry Potter. Whatever. Hey, I'm watching Catching Fire, so relax. Because Hunger Games is a pretty good story. Anyway, so in the election of 1880, the Republicans, they nominate James A. Garfield as their president. And he's a half-breed. But the vice president, Chester A. Arthur, is a stalwart. So again, they nominate James A. Garfield as a half-breed and Chester A. Arthur as a vice president who is a stalwart. So who's really happy about this? Who's more happy? Half-breeds, right? Because he's the one running the government, and so who's going to probably get most of the jobs? The half-breeds will likely get most of the jobs. And do you think making a stalwart the vice president was a compromise within the Republican Party? Probably, right? Very unlikely to have a half-breed president, because that political party would have split. So it was a compromise. Well, in that election between the Republicans and the Democrats, Republicans win. What do you notice, by the way? What do you notice? Does the country look divided again? Pretty much. You had the solid South. You really refer to the Democrats they call this the solid South because the South almost always votes for what? The Democratic Party. It flips eventually, so now the solid South almost always votes for the Republican Party, but we'll talk about that later. But for now, the Solid South was reliable because they almost always voted for the Democratic Party until they switched. But anyway, you have the Solid South. Still, James A. Garfield is elected, serving from 1880 to 1881. What happened? He died. What do you think happened? He got killed. Killed by who, you think? A stalwart, probably. Yeah. Fun facts about James A. Garfield. He hated Mondays and he loved lasagna. It's not true. That's true of Garfield the cat, but not of Garfield the president. People tend to write that down because they think it's true. Like, oh, Garfield is named after him? No. It's just a name that's fairly common. But anyway, James A. Garfield. President, what do people want from him? Now that he's president, what do people want? Jobs! Give us jobs! Party patronage, I'm a half-breed, give me a job. The problem is, who's not going to get jobs? Stalwarts. So what ends up happening is President Garfield is assassinated by this man, Charles Guiteau, with the ridiculously large gun. It's a hand cannon. But in any case, folks, what happens is that James A. Garfield is on a train. And what ends up happening is Charles Guiteau shoots him on that train because he demands a job, and Garfield's like, no. So he says, oh, okay, well, I brought this gun, and I aim to use it. So he shoots him. Garfield dies 11 weeks later, suffering from the horrible attack that he just suffered. In the back. You can't even see it. He just knows it hurts. But in any case, folks, Garfield is shot. He's assassinated. He's killed. Charles Guiteau is arrested quickly because he's on a train. He can't really go anywhere. And he goes to trial. He pleads the insanity defense, like he clearly was crazy. But he's still found guilty, and he's hung to death for treason. Because you can't go around killing the president, guys. You're just not allowed to do that. By the way, today is the anniversary of what? The assassination of John F. Kennedy in Dallas. Today's the anniversary. Anyway, replacing him is Chester A. Arthur, 1881 to 1884. He's a stalwart. So now he's president. Who's really excited? The stalwart's like, oh, yeah! And who's not happy? Half-breeds, and what is he worried about? Like, he might get killed. Like, oh, no. Oh, no. I don't like where this is going. So he says, look, this system's got to change. Because if he keeps on letting the spoil system continue, what might happen to him? He might get assassinated. Because up to this point, it was his job to give people jobs. And did it really matter who he gave jobs to? He gave it to whomever he wanted, right? He says that's probably not the most efficient way to run a government. So in 1883, he passes the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act. What's civil service? When you work for who? The government. It's government service. Like, I'm a civil servant. I work for the government. So, in any case, folks, Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 1883. Here's what it did. It ended the spoil system, or the party patronage system. It ended the spoil system and party patronage system, and replaced it with the merit system. What's a merit system? When you give jobs based on merit, what does that mean?
Based on yourself?
Based on skills, based on your abilities. Okay, like, let's say I had never flown an airplane before, but you had. But the owner of that company was my best friend. Who would get that job based on a spoil system?
You.
I would, because we're friends. But based on merit, who should get that job? You should get that job because you actually know how to fly a plane. And people probably won't die. And so, folks, a merit system is based on ability. The other idea was that you were required to take a competitive exam. Because the goal was to make sure that people who earned government office were qualified. Because up until this point, folks, who were we appointing?
Anyone?
Just whoever we want. Remember Jackson's spoil system?
Yeah.
Just appointed his friends and supporters and the corruption and whatever else. Just common men everywhere. Yeah, that was bad. So they said, we got to fix that. So they created a competitive exam and a merit system. Today, for example, if you want to work for the U.S. government and you want to work for, I don't know, you want to be an ambassador or you work at the U.S. Embassy, you have to take the civil service exam. You can't just work for the government and take no exam. You have to be qualified. It's like for teaching. I can't just be a teacher. Like, I want to be a teacher today. All right, you're in. No, I have to prove that I'm qualified to be a teacher. There are exams for that. Yes?
So is President McMahon's job doing it today?
Yeah, actually. So here's how the graph works, folks. This shows the percentage of people required to take the civil service exam today. Of course, Arthur was the first, so there weren't very many. But over the years, what do you see happening? A larger and larger percentage of people are taking the civil service exam in order to earn government office. In Bush and Clinton years, that changed. The reason why it changed is we decided that postal workers don't have to take the civil service exam. The reason why is not because their job isn't important, but, let me put this delicately, it was a job that did not require an exam. Does that make sense? They could perform their task, and there wasn't an exam required to determine if they could perform the task of postal work. Does that make sense to everyone? Right? Okay. I said in a way that wouldn't offend anyone. Right? Cool. All right. So, civil service exams still used today, but we just don't require everyone to take the civil service exam anymore. So it brings us to the election of 1884. And in the election of 1884, the Democrats nominate Grover Cleveland, and the Republicans nominate James Blaine. Have you guys heard of any of these presidents? Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland.
I've heard of Grover Cleveland.
You've heard of Grover Cleveland? Because you know Cleveland, Ohio? Yeah, Grover Cleveland and James Blaine run for office in 1884. Grover Cleveland's vice president, or his running mate rather, was Elmo. They were actually the first candidate from Sesame Street. People at home listening are just like, what's happening? They don't know what to do with their notes. In the election, who wins? Cleveland wins, making him the 22nd president of the United States, serving from 84 to 88. Yes, ma'am. Oh, just the question is, why are the different colors? Oh, it's just that they just switch colors from time to time. But the idea is that the Republicans won some northern states, but you can see that the Democrats won a lot of northern states this year. But in terms of green, blue, red, it doesn't really matter. It's just how we decided to color the maps that time. So it's important that Grover Cleveland won because he's a Democrat. That's pretty important. He also won because he was supported by the Republican mugwumps. Who were the mugwumps?
They were the guys who stayed all of the...
Yeah, they stayed in the middle. And why did they not vote for James Blaine? They thought he was what? They thought he was corrupt. So they thought, let's change government. Let's vote for a Democrat. They thought that would change things up a little bit. And interestingly enough, folks, when was the last time we had a Democratic president? Seems like a while now, right? It's been 24 years since a Democrat was elected to office. That's a long time. In fact, folks, we haven't had a Democrat elected to office since Lincoln. So Lincoln was a Republican, and Buchanan was the last Democrat to be elected to office. Buchanan. Yeah. And then the whole Civil War began. It's been Republican since. So Grover Cleveland is the first Democratic candidate since the Civil War, or first Democratic president since the Civil War. What did he do? He lowered the tariff. Hooray. Why do you think the tariff was high during like Reconstruction and the Civil War? What do we need the money for? Pay for the war and pay for Reconstruction, right? We need the money. So he lowered the tariff for the first time, so that's pretty cool. He paid Civil War pensions. What are pensions? Money for what, though? Like, when do you get it? Yeah, it's retirement, pretty much. It's retirement savings. And he did not help drought-stricken farmers. So in Texas, there was a drought. What's a drought?
Oh, it's when you dry up in the land.
Yeah, there's no water, right? And so the farmer's like, please help us. And he said, no, we're not going to do that.
Why not?
Why not, folks? What philosophy did we have of government at this time? It was a do-nothing government. What's that French term? Laissez-faire? Or laissez-faire? But in a laissez-faire government, that was a do-nothing government. So they said, look, you chose to farm there, and you lost. I didn't make you farm there. I didn't make the rain stop falling. That's not my responsibility. You gambled and you lost when you farmed. That happened, so I'm not going to get involved, folks. If you go to Las Vegas and gamble all your money and you lose, do you get to go to the government and say, I lost all my money gambling, give me my money back? No, the government's not going to give you your money back. The same argument applied to farms back then. They said, look, you chose to grow your crops in Texas. I didn't make you move there. You thought you were going to be successful, right? Would I be demanding money back if you succeeded? No. So why are you demanding money from me when you lost? Sorry, you gambled and you lost. So he didn't want to get involved, which means who didn't like the Democrats very much? Farmers did not like Democrats very much. Anyway, in the election of 1888, the Republicans decide to run Benjamin Harrison against Grover Cleveland. Benjamin Harrison, fun fact, is the great-grandson of William Henry Harrison, the former ninth president of the United States. Remember the guy that died after 30 days? This is his grandson, Benjamin Harrison. Not only is he related to William Henry Harrison, he's also related to Santa Claus. Good? Okay. Here's why the Republicans will win in this election. The Republicans, or rather, big businesses decide to vote for Republicans. So the big businesses in the North decide to vote Republican. And in order to make sure that the Republicans win, the big businesses make sure that who else votes for the Republican Party? Their workers. So the big businesses force their workers to vote for the Republican Party. They say that the Republican Party is better for business, so they vote Republican. By the way, this whip, it says coercion, like they're forcing their workers to vote for the Republican Party. That's the idea. Otherwise, they'd fire them. Or they'd say, hey, if you don't vote for the Republican Party, I'm going to have to close down my factory, which means what for you? No job. So if you want to keep your job, you got to vote Republican. They're using scare tactics. By the way, they still use this today. They say, hey, if you want to keep your job, don't vote for Obama or don't vote for Mitt Romney because that guy's going to ruin the economy. So they use these scare tactics today still. But anyway, that was one way they got people to vote Republican. The other way was through negative campaigning. And the Republicans accused the Democrats of being the party of rum, Romanism, and rebellion. The Republicans accused the Democrats of being the party of rum, Romanism, and rebellion. They said, don't vote for the Democrats. They're the party of rum, Romanism, and rebellion. Now here's my question. What three things are they criticizing the Democratic Party for? Okay, so who wants to tackle one of these? Rum, Romanism, and rebellion. Okay, Beatrice? Okay, so alcohol, yes, but specifically what kind of alcohol? Or which group drinks a lot of alcohol? No, but be more specific, which common group drinks a lot of alcohol that they think is just bad? Not the poor, not the farmers. It's more like a race of people. The Irish. They say, don't vote for the Democrats, they're Irish. Also, why else shouldn't we vote for the Democrats? Yeah, Stephanie? They're Catholic, Romanism. They're Roman Catholics, terrible. They're going to listen to the Pope, that's awful. And also rebellion, they're the party of what? What happened, folks? What do the Democrats do? Why are they the party of rebellion? Yeah, the Civil War. They are the party of Southern secession. So they said, don't vote for the Democratic Party. They're evil. They're the party of those Irish. And they're Catholics. And they're the party of secession. So, who didn't like this negative campaign? The Irish, the Catholics, the South. They're like, whoa, 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 not okay. But it did prove effective in this first election, but they're going to get a comeback later. But as you can see here, the Republicans win. And President Harrison becomes the 23rd president of the United States, serving from 1888 to 1892. Every time I look at Benjamin Harrison's picture, I think he's thinking about pie. He's thinking about pie. Anyway, folks, Benjamin Harrison was president when we had our first billion-dollar Congress. What I mean by that is our Congress spent $1 billion that year. What does that suggest about the U.S. economy? It's not broke, it's growing. If we can spend, we're not going to spend money we don't have, or at least we're not supposed to. But the fact that we can spend $1 billion means the U.S. economy is growing and growing and growing. Remember when we first had our economy back in like Jamestown 1607, when we had like shells and like beaver furs? But now we have billions of dollars. Yeah, we've done pretty well for ourselves in the last 200 years or so. So, the first $1 billion Congress. What does he do with that money? Well, he pays Civil War veterans their pensions. That's always good. He also buys a lot of silver. The Sherman Silver Purchase Act is where the government buys silver. Why does the government buy silver for itself? So that it can do what?
It can make more money.
It can print money. So the reason why the government buys all this silver is so that it can print money. And by printing money, that's going to cause what? What happens when you print money? Inflation. So they want to create inflation. Now, again, people assume that inflation is always bad. No. A little bit inflation is good every single year. So like 2%, 2%, 2%. That's actually what you want to happen, because if you're having more money in the economy, that means what's happening in your economy? It's growing. So you want inflation. You don't want 9,000% inflation, but you want like 2, 3% inflation. That's always good. Here's why inflation is good then. First off, let's say we all got a $10,000 raise. Okay, let's say everyone gets $10,000 more every year now. But what if there's not enough money? Do we all get raises? No, but is it good that we all got raises? Sure, so that's why inflation is happening. Does that make sense? The group that really liked inflation, though, were farmers. Farmers loved inflation. And specifically debtors. Farmers and debtors loved inflation. Let me explain why. Let's say in 1993, 20 years ago, I lent you $10. You weren't even born yet, but I lent it to you. Okay? Now, back in 1993, a soda bottle cost about, let's say, 25 cents. So you're masters of mathematician. How many sodas could I buy back in 1993 with my $10? 40 bottles of soda. Everyone good so far? Okay, well I say, hey non-existent person, I'm going to lend you $10. But in 20 years, you have to pay me back $10. Make sense so far? Now it's 2013. How much do you owe me? $10. How much is a soda bottle usually worth now? $1. How many sodas can you now buy? $10. Is my $10 today worth more or less than it was worth 20 years ago? It's worth less. But when I lent you $10 back then, could that $10 buy a lot?
Yeah.
But now you're paying back $10. You're paying me back with a $10 that's less, but you're okay with that because you're paying me back with cheaper money. Does that make sense? It's the exact same bill, but that money has less power. Because if you want to pay me back the equivalent of power, how much money should you have given me? $40. Does that make sense, folks? You should have given me $40 if you want to talk about giving me the equivalent of monetary power. But that's not what happened. You're giving me back money that's cheaper than it was 20 years ago. So that's why farmers love this, or people in debt. If you lent me $20 back then, let's say my $10, let's say you bought I lent you $100 back then, and let's say in 1860, that $100 could buy a tractor. But 20 years later, that $100 can only buy a bale of hay. And is it going to be a problem for me to give you $100 now? Oh, no, it's only a bale of hay. Whereas 20 years ago, that $100 was a tractor. You see what I mean by getting paid back in cheaper money? Everyone loves this because you get to pay back in cheaper money. With inflation is good for some of us because if you're in debt, you're paying back with less money than you actually owed. Provided there's no actual interest. If there's interest, then they're going to get you anyway. But it's true. But if there's no interest, you're paying back in cheaper money. So do that with your family one day. Hey, can I borrow $10,000 and pay you back in 30 years? Interest-free. You will make so much money. Because maybe today, a $10,000 buys you a car. But in 20 years, $10,000 might buy you a loaf of bread. Oh, here's $10,000. I owed you $10,000. Here you go, $10,000. Enjoy that loaf of bread. Thanks for the car. You see how that works? Does everyone understand inflation now? Most people don't. I'm glad that you guys do. Because most people don't understand how inflation works. Anyway, the other thing is McKinley tariff. The McKinley tariff was a tariff increase to 48%. Is that a lot? That's a lot, 48% tariff. But he decided he wanted to protect what? He wanted to protect big businesses. This is bad for who? Little businesses, but also bad for who? Common man, common farmers. This is bad for common man and farmers. So do the farmers really like the Republican Party either? They're kind of iffy about them too. But anyway, everyone good in Benjamin Harrison? Awesome. Yes? So in the election of 1892, Benjamin Harrison runs again, and Grover Cleveland decides to run against him again.
Thank you.
So again, Harrison runs against Cleveland again. They decide to run again against each other. And in this election, Cleveland wins. But what's more important than the fact that Cleveland wins? There's a third party. A very important third party. The Populist Party. The emergence of the Populist Party. We'll talk about them in section 4, but we're going to introduce them now. Okay? So the Populist Party runs in the election of 1892. Their leaders are Mary Ellen Lease and James Weaver. They're both farmers. James Weaver is also the name of my 7th grade PE teacher. Just so you know. I didn't say they're the same person. I'm just saying that's the name of my 7th grade PE teacher. Because I thought that's something you would want to know. Anyway, the Populist Party is going to represent Midwestern and Southern farmers and Northern factory workers. Because do these three groups feel like they're being represented by the Democratic or Republican Party? No, they feel like their interests are being ignored. The Democrats are ignoring the needs of the farmers, and Northern factory workers are being ignored by the Republicans for big business. And so they decide to create their own party called the Populist Party, which is just another term for the party for who? What does populist mean again? When you say talk about population, popular vote means the people. It's the People's Party. So when you see the word popule or popule, it just means people. I mean, it looks like people. Not like it looks like a human. It means it looks like the word people. So again, Populist Party, it's the People's Party. We'll talk more about them in a bit. But Grover Cleveland becomes the 24th President of the United States, serving from 1892 to 1896, which makes him the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. What does that mean? They were not back-to-back, because it was Cleveland, and then Harrison, and then Cleveland again. So he's the only president ever to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. But here's why it screws things up, kind of. Barack Obama, when he was elected, served in the 44th administration of the United States of America as president. But he's only the 43rd person to be president of the United States. Because Cleveland counts as 22 and 24. But he's a 22nd person to be president. 23rd was Harrison. You don't count him as a new person to be president again. So he messed it up for everyone. Because Barack Obama is serving in the 44th administration, but he's the 43rd person to be president. So, fun fact. Yeah, so we're like, what president is he? 43? Well, he's 44. He's also kind of 43. So, it just depends. Thanks, Cleveland. The Depression of 1893 is what Cleveland has to deal with. Hey, when was the last Depression?
3 years ago.
Was it 1873? When was 1873? In the Depression of 1893, it's caused by what? Over-speculation. It's like that always happens. Like, as if like mankind doesn't know that this happens every 20 years. Over-speculation this time? When they over-constructed in railroads, and they over-speculated in farms, or railroads and farms. Because people are moving in which direction? West. And they built too many railroads, they built too many farms. And can you always build and build and build and always succeed? No, people are bound to lose, and they lost. Folks, it's argued that this is our second worst depression in our history, the first being the Great Depression, but the second being the Depression of 1893. In this depression, 80,000 businesses shut down in 6 months. Guys, if 80,000 businesses shut down today, would that be a lot?
Yeah.
Yes. Now, this is a tenth the size of our economy today, and 80,000 of their businesses shut down. Is that pretty staggering?
Yeah.
It's like if I told you guys, we just lost like 1 million businesses yesterday. That's really bad. In this case, folks, you have 20% unemployment. 20%. Does anyone know what today's unemployment rate is? It's like at 11%. That's double. And today's still bad, right? We're like, oh my gosh, the unemployment is so terrible. 20% unemployment. It's awful. Great Depression was 25%, so it's not that much higher. So this is one of our worst depressions. You also see the rise of hobos. What are hobos? How are they different from just like homeless folks? What did hobos do that were different from just regular homeless? They're constantly looking for jobs. If you think of hobos, folks, you can think of those dudes with like the, they're like, so usually like polka dotted, right? And they're like moving from, pretty much hobos were people moving from town to town looking for work. They had like their stuff on their sack and they're like moving from town to town. That's a hobo. They're transients. Yeah, they would get on the trains. It's called riding the rail. They get on a train, just go to another city. Hopefully they can find work there. Called riding the rails.
They really have a staff.
Mm-hmm. Because how else would they carry their stuff? They don't have backpacks. So they put their stuff on a sack and it's not like they had a lot of possessions anyway. They'd carry what they had and they would go. Sometimes they just carry in a regular bag, but this is more iconic. Food, clothing, materials, keepsakes. Anyway, folks, here's Uncle Sam trying to ward off danger. Columbia's trying to get there as soon as she can. But Uncle Sam's trying to prevent danger and hard times from attacking the house. Columbia, Spirit of America. She's like, I'm coming, Uncle Sam. One way to try to fix the problem was Coxey's army. Coxey's army was led by a man named Jacob Coxey. And this was not a military group. This was not like soldiers. Coxey's army was an army of unemployed workers who marched to D.C. Okay, this was an army of unemployed workers that marched on Washington, D.C. Good so far? A group of unemployed workers that marched to Washington, D.C. Thousands of them marched to D.C. Well, when they marched to Congress, they demanded that Congress spend $500 million on public works. They wanted Congress to spend $500 million on public works. What are public works? Internal improvements. They wanted to spend $500 million on internal improvements. You know, like infrastructure. So what do we want them to build specifically? Things like what? Roads, bridges, canals, schools, internal improvements, or infrastructure. We want them to build stuff. And how are these men going to benefit if we build this stuff? It's going to create jobs. By the way, folks, many people wonder why Congress is bickering over like health care or filibusters or like tax codes or Senate appointments, when really what they should be focusing on is what? Creating jobs. In fact, you could argue that one of the things that we really need to fix is our infrastructure in this country. 1 in 9 bridges in America, folks, is in disrepair. 1 in 9 bridges in America is in need of severe retrofitting. 1 in 9. That means 1 of every 9 bridges you drive on, you probably shouldn't be driving on. But we should be spending $20 billion annually in trying to fix our bridges and infrastructure. We're spending like 6. And we're not catching up at all. So it's kind of a problem. What did Congress say when Coxey's army marched on to Washington? They said, nope, we're not going to do that. Why? Are we going to do nothing for you? Laissez-faire. It's not our fault. You know what? You chose the wrong jobs. 80% of the population is not unemployed. Why don't you do that? So they complain. Congress says no, but they refuse to leave. And can they arrest these men for protesting?
No.
Is protesting illegal?
No.
No. So they said, how are we going to get these people out? He said, I know. They've already broken the law. If you look closely right here, folks, they're walking on the grass.
What?
And in certain parts of D.C., you are not allowed to walk on the grass. Because, it's grass. They want to maintain it. Public ordinance, public law. So they arrested the Coxey's army leaders, and without their leaders, what happened to the army? They just fell apart. They went back home because they walked on the grass. So be careful when protesting, folks. Make sure you know all the minor laws. Like, wait, are we allowed to walk on the grass during this protest? Because if not, that's going to be a really foolish way to lose our protest. In any case, that's Coxey's army. Eventually, in the election of 1896, the Republicans nominate William McKinley, and the Democrats and the Populists, they both nominate William Jennings Bryan. The Republicans nominate William McKinley, while the Democrats nominate and the Populists nominate. They both nominate William Jennings Bryan. It's the Battle of the Bills. By the way, William Jennings Bryan will run for president several times, and he'll never win. It's sad. You're like, oh, William Jennings Bryan, will you ever be president? And he really wants to be president, but he never wins. He never won once. Poor guy. Look at those eyes, so hopeful, full of ambition. But we're gonna stamp that flame inside out because, sorry, William Jennings Bryan, you're gonna win nothing. We will continue this election in Section 4. Well, I figured we'd take a break from politics and talk about industrialization. Part 2 of the Gilded Age. I like this part of the unit, though, because we get to talk about technology. Not today, but on Monday when I see you guys, I'll bring you guys some old school cameras from the 1890s and 1900s. I'll bring you guys a typewriter from the 1900s. Some stuff you guys will get to see that are older than the school. I'll bring some stuff in. Should be kind of neat. So the Gilded Age, Section 2.1, the rise of industrial America. Okay. So, something you guys should note first. Let's look at this map. What's happening in America? What types of industries do you see emerging? Who wants to raise their hand and tell me? What types of industries do we see emerging in America? Roger, give me one.
I see lots of oil in Texas.
Oil, yeah, lots of oil emerging. Oh, whoops, let's go back. Lots of oil emerging at this time. What other industries do you guys see emerging at this time? That's kind of new, you would argue. Yeah, Eric? Coal. You see a lot of coal emerging at this time as well. A lot of oil emerging at this time, even here in California, folks. A lot of our beaches, I'll show you photos later, but you guys think like Huntington Beach is like this open beaches. Back in like the early 1900s, just oil drills across the beach, like all along the coast. Like oil drills like every 20 feet, just like up like 30 feet high. Oh yeah. That Huntington Beach was just like completely different 100 years ago compared to what it looks like today. You also see them mining a lot of gold at this time. You see a lot of iron. Yeah, so is America diversifying? Are they growing and doing a lot of different things now?
Yeah.
Good. You'll notice also in America, where in the world are we industrializing? Europe and America. And so America is industrializing. Is the rest of the world really industrializing? No, and so we're those two regions of industrialization. And you have all of Europe, and then you have America. And how do you think we're going to stand up to European industrialism? I mean, they started before us, right? So how do you think we're going to do against them?
Second place.
Second place, you think? Nope.
No.
In a 30-year period, America produces this much iron, and then bam! What now, Europe? Yeah, how do you like them apples, Great Britain? With regard to steel, here's America way down there, and then boom! How about them apples? Germany. And then here, coal. We're beating them out again as well. So again, in a 30-year period, remember folks, we just finished the Civil War. In 30 years, we industrialized our entire country to beat out all these other countries. In fact, in steel, folks, we beat out almost all these countries combined, right? Almost combined, actually. No, we don't. I was going to say, like, no. That's not how math works. But it's close. We outproduce every single country, which is very impressive. If you don't include Germany, then maybe we outproduce. Actually, we do outproduce England and France combined. Not Germany. But anyway. So are we doing pretty well for ourselves?
Yeah.
Definitely. Look at the U.S. economy. What's happening to the U.S. economy at this time?
It's growing a lot.
It's growing exponentially. I mean, look at this time period.
How dramatic
Crazy.
increase right there.
And so, folks, what led to this massive increase in our economy?
Growth of railroads.
Railroads, folks. Let's talk about railroads first. Remember how railroads were like back in the market revolution? They were great, but they were kind of funny because they always screwed up and didn't do what we wanted them to. Well, railroads got better. Way better. We made them better. Harder. Faster. Stronger. In 1865, we had 35,000 miles of rail in the U.S., which is good. It's okay. It's kind of paltry. Compared to 1900, when we had 193,000 miles of rail in the U.S. If I had a mic, I'd drop it. That's a lot of railroad in a 30 or 35-year period, folks. 193,000 miles of rail. Why is this going to benefit us? With all these rails, how is that going to better serve us as an economy? Better trade, more communication, faster communication, things won't rot. I mean, really, really good. In fact, folks, I want you to write this phrase down. With regard to railroads, many historians, I among them, would argue that railroads are the greatest invention with the most significant impact on U.S. economic life. Railroads are the greatest invention with the most significant impact on U.S. economic life. One more time. Railroads are the greatest invention with the most significant impact on U.S. economic life. Now you might think, Mr. King, that's a very bold statement. I know. Let me try to argue it real quick. Here's why historians and I would argue that this is true. Here's a list of facts that you can help support the statement. Number one, because of railroads, what did it do to the U.S. economy? What's that term that we use for connecting them together? It created an integrated national market. Point one, it created an integrated national market. That's the first point. Because could canals really do that?
No.
Regular roads? No, it had to be railroads that created an integrated national market. Two, because they're now integrated, what could these different areas now do?
Just sectional
They could trade, and because they could trade now, what can I do here in this? So you have regional specialization. That's two. Second point, regional specialization. Right, now that we're connected, do I have to grow everything on my own? No, I can focus. I can specialize. Point three. Because of regional specialization, folks, I get to focus, right? And because I'm focusing on one thing, what happens to production in my region? You see mass production. It allows for mass production. And why is mass production good for you and I? Jobs is great, definitely. What else? Like, as a consumer, how do we benefit from mass production?
You can create more.
Cheaper goods, more goods. Cheaper and more plentiful goods. So mass production is great. 4, right? 4? I'm assuming. Okay. It led to the rise of other industries that are very important to the U.S. economy. it led to the rise of other industries. Because of railroads, folks, it led to the rise of other industries. What other industries are we talking about? What did we need for the railroads?
Steel.
Steel, definitely. What else?
Wood.
Not wood. Well, I guess wood, but not so much. Coal. What else? Iron. Meat is another good one. The meat industry. How might the meat industry benefit from trains? Food. Before, what were we worried about when transporting meat? It would spoil. But now, can we transport meat very quickly? Also, with trains, I don't even have to transport the meat. I could transport the what? The entire cow across the country. Could I do that on, like, canals? No, the cows move around and the boat would tip. You do it on roads, you have to feed them while you're doing it, and it's slow. But on trains, you feed them, you water them, you travel really, really far, you stop at a station, put water down on the tops, and you travel them all the way across. Very easy. So the meat industry benefits. And the last one, among many others, it allowed for the population of the West. It allowed for the population of the West. Without these things, folks, could America be as great as it is today? No, we would lack regional specialization. We wouldn't have mass production. We wouldn't have a populated West. I mean, could you say that the railroad was very significant to the growth of the U.S.? Okay, so here's my question then. Don't shout it out loud. Think about it to yourself first. Is there an invention today, in your opinion, that is now more important and more significant in impacting U.S. economic life? So think about it to yourself. Don't say it out loud. Is there an invention, in your opinion, that you think is more important than the railroad in changing U.S. economic life? It's an opinion question. Think about it. What, in your opinion, is far more important than trains today that impacted U.S. economic life?
Nowadays,
Yeah, we're going to talk about it.
nowadays inventions.
Yeah, you can talk about modern inventions if you want. You can talk about something that was created a little while ago that's still really important today if you want. But is there an invention that you think beats out the railroad? Give you guys about 20 more seconds to think about it. Something better than the railroad. Okay. Who wants to raise their hand and tell me what they think is the most important invention today? Let's start off with Josie. Shh. The computer, why? Okay, so like the processing power of computers is very, very more important than railroads. Anyone else think they have something better than computers? Jerry? Airplanes? Do you think airplanes are better than railroads? Do you think it's better than a computer? Maybe. Who thinks they have something better than a computer? Vaccinations? So vaccinations are better than computers?
Commercial farms, because you need to feed everyone.
Commercial farming is better than computers? I haven't heard the answer that I would argue yet. Huh? Cars or planes? I mean, they're good, but they're not... I mean, they change the game a little. But there's something, in my opinion, that's far more important.
Sign on.
Folks... The internet. That's not. A computer is not. I mean, it's the closest, but the computer is not the internet. Think about it, folks. The internet just started when I was growing up. Like, it just started. I even remember when I got my first AOL CD and I got AOL. And I got on the internet and you could, like, search stuff. But the internet drastically has changed the world in 20 years. Think about the way we communicate now. Before, we still have to pick up the phone and dial. Now with the internet, you have instant communication wherever you are, worldwide. You can share photo albums. Think about, like, politically. People are far more informed and educated voters because of the internet. Access to information, allowing, like, protests across the world. Economically, being able to just have all these instant transactions. I don't have to leave my home anymore, and I can still feel connected to the world. The internet has drastically changed how we interact with each other, how we interact with information, how we interact with the world. I mean, the internet is vastly superior, in my opinion, to any new technology today. And what it will be in the future, I don't know. But the internet, in my opinion, has to be one of the most important inventions of our time. Another important invention, in my opinion, not of our time, but just in general, glasses. You know how screwed so many of us would be if they never invented, like, bifocals or glasses? Folks, if I didn't have glasses, I wouldn't work. I mean, many poor people back then, if you had vision problems, you'd be poor. Who would hire you? Who would hire you if you can't see? Folks, if I was born, like, in the 1600s, I would be a beggar because I wouldn't be able to see. Which is true, I imagine, for many of you. How many of you guys have glasses or corrective lenses? Yeah, the vast majority of us would be relegated to being poor because we couldn't work. In any case, folks, railroads, really important to the U.S. economy. So, something else you should... While railroads were built by private companies, folks, railroad construction was supported with federal and state subsidies. So railroad construction, quiet down, was supported with federal and state subsidies. So again, private companies built the railroads, but that construction was supported with federal and state subsidies. A subsidy, folks, is when the government just gives you like a gift. In this case, it's what? Land. But a federal government can also give you subsidies if you're growing a farm, not through land, but with money. Does that make sense? So the government gives you money, that's a subsidy. If they give you land, that can also be a subsidy. So the federal government decided to give these railroad companies land to help build the railroads. Why might the government do that? Were we as a government going to benefit from railroads? How would we benefit as a government? If the economy is better connected, do we benefit? Yes. If we have more and more people move west, do we benefit? Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of benefits here. But the other benefit that's not obvious is that did we provide a major part of these railroads? The land, right? So because we provided land, the government required that we get free use of the railroads for military and postal use. So the government got free use or free access to railroads for military and postal use. We get to use it for free because we paid for part of it with land. So we get free use of the railroads or free access to railroads for military and postal use. So you can use it to transport troops and what else? Deliver the mail. Did you guys know that we still do this today with railroads, but also planes? If you guys, let's say, are flying Southwest Airlines, they actually put mail on those planes, and they fly it across because that's usually faster. And if they're going there anyway, let's just put it on the plane and fly it across. So the Postal Office buys space, cargo space, on certain planes as they travel across the country because why not do that? That's not a bad idea. That happens today as well. Anywho, did we build a lot of roads or railroads? Oh, yeah. Quite a bit. In fact, where else did we build railroads? In the South. Is that important? Yeah, because what happened to all the railroads in the South? We destroyed a bunch of them. Remember Sherman? Yeah. Breaking all those railroads? Well, we built them. Again. One of the more important railroads that we built were the Transcontinental railroads. What was the goal of the Transcontinental Railroad? To go across the continent. And the goal was to connect the East Coast to what? Specifically what? California. To us. Everyone wants California, folks. So here's what we did.
Good morning. Please excuse the interruption. Teachers, this is a reminder that there will be no EIT today. Once again, there is no EIT released today. Students need to remain in class until the bell rings. Please see your email from Mrs. Smalley for verification. Again, no EIT. Thank you so much for your cooperation.
Oh, and I was going to give you guys EIT today. Let me go see why real quick. All right, so Transcontinental Railroad was supposed to connect the East Coast to California. So what we did was we hired 2 railroads to build the Transcontinental Railroad. The first company that we hired, quiet down, was Union Pacific. And Union Pacific was going to build from Nebraska, and they were supposed to build westward. So they're going to build from Nebraska and build it towards the west. When they built this railroad, folks, they hired blacks and Irish to help build their side of the railroad. Good so far? Okay. There's actually a TV show on AMC that's about building the Transcontinental Railroad. It's like right out. It's It's called Hell's on Wheels. It's about like a southern. It's based on a former Southern Confederate soldier whose family was murdered by Northern Union soldiers, and so he wants revenge. But then it shows like him helping build the Transcontinental Railroad. There's blacks and Irish. It's actually pretty interesting. I've only seen a few episodes so far, but it's actually quite good. But it's called Hell's on Wheels. I recommend it. On the other side, they hired Central Pacific. And Central Pacific's job was to build from California and build in which direction? East, towards Nebraska. And they hired both Chinese and Mexican immigrants to help build the railroad. Now, folks, you have 2 railroads building. Okay? Now, this is a race, though, because don't they both want to see who can get there first? So they're both racing. And in fact, they get so good that Central Pacific in one day lays down 10 miles of track. In one day. It's a race, and so one day they're able to lay down 10 miles of track in one day. That's a lot, folks. Go run 10 miles today. And while you're doing it, lay down track. See how long that takes you. Not one day. Well, they're trying to make sure that they're building it correctly while still laying it. That's why it's not like 30 miles of track, because we could just like laid it down and like, we put it down, but completely unsafe. No, they laid down 10 miles of safe track, and it was pretty impressive. The goal was eventually to combine both tracks in Promontory Point, Utah. So the goal was to combine both tracks at Promontory Point, Utah. And this is an image of those 2 train tracks finally coming together. And then they combined it, and they toasted. And then when they combined and they finally built the 2 tracks together, they put a golden spike and they hammered it in, and they combined the trains officially. There's a huge party, and people had a really good time. And then that night, while people were drunk and partying, someone stole the golden spike. I know. Someone did. Huh? The goal was to combine the two trains together. And when they combined it at Promontory Point, Utah, they completed the Transcontinental Railroad. They commemorated it with a golden spike, at which point it was stolen. They replaced it with the regular steel spike. They were going to do that anyway, but someone stole it before they could replace it. Sad. I also like this picture because these two trains are now facing each other. Like, wait, who's going to go first now? And then they back up all the way. Again, we talked about how Chinese workers worked on the Central Pacific and black workers worked on the Union Pacific. You should also know 4 other transcontinental railroads. You should be familiar with the Great Northern Line, the Northern Pacific Line, the Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe Line, and the Southern Pacific Line. So these are 4 other transcontinental railroads. The reason why you should know these is because sometimes they will ask you, they will list some of these, and they'll say, what are these? And you'll be like, cereal companies? No, they're railroads. So, the clue for most of them, folks, is Pacific. In order to say Pacific, that means railroads going towards the Pacific Ocean. Can anyone find the Transcontinental Railroad?
Is it one that starts at Vicksburg all the way to... Wait, never mind.
This one right here. The Central Union Pacific one, that's the Transcontinental Railroad. By the way, who had a harder time? Central Pacific or Union Pacific?
I don't know.
Why did Central have a harder time? They had to build over the mountains. So Central Pacific had to build over the Rocky Mountains. Union Pacific has to build it on flat land all the way across. But we still beat them. And we go to Great Northern Pacific. Good so far? Okay. No, not yet. No. Why do you think they called the Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe the Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe Railroad? Why do you think they called the Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe Railroad the Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe Railroad? It's not because multiple people built it. It's the cities they went through. Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe. Technological improvements. So, how do we make this railroad better? Remember this railroad? Remember the old railroads?
Give it better engines.
Yeah, well, we made it better. Here's how. Number 1.
Better engines.
Steel rails. Why are steel rails better than iron rails?
They're stronger.
Stronger. They can take more heat. They won't melt or burn or warp. Steel rails are stronger.
Because of the carbon.
Also, remember that stupid problem with the train tracks and they were different sizes? Well, we created a uniform track. 4 feet, 8.5 inches. So if you want to make sure that it's actually 4 feet, 8.5 inches, find out how tall your younger brother or cousin is, and have them lay down to make sure that they're 4 feet, 8.5 inches on the track. And oh, you guys are actually the same width. Don't do that. Don't make your brothers or sisters or cousins lay down on a train track. That's dangerous. But again, uniform track. Another really significant improvement, air brakes. Remember before when we would brake? We pull it. Yeah. Well, we stopped that. We're like, that's ridiculous. We can't keep. That's embarrassing now. So air brakes. They would use pneumatic pressure, air pressure, to stop the tracks almost not instantly, but very quickly. And so you have air brakes now. And also because we're fancy, you have the Pullman Palace cars. Yeah, these two right here. Pullman Palace cars. They're like the what of train travel? First class. Because if you're going to travel across the country, is it still going to take a long time? It's not 6 hours a day. It's still going to take 4 days, 5 days. And so Pullman Palace cars made sure that people that could afford it would have these fancy rooms. They had nice cushiony chairs. They would be able to like have their own beds, servants maybe, a cook. That was pretty common on a Pullman Palace car. Pullman Palace car. I mean, it's called a train car. How many of you guys have ever ridden a train before? Anyone ever ridden trains before? So I've ridden trains both in America and in China. In America, I would just rode like Amtrak. You just sit on you have a nice cushioned seat and you would travel like 3 miles. When I was in China, I experienced both not first class and then like kind of first class. In one of the travels when I was traveling through China, I rode on a train and I bought a ticket that day. So I didn't reserve a room. And so the way that works is pretty much you buy a ticket, but it's a ticket for like space. It's not for a seat. And so me and my friends, there were about 4 of us that got on the train first, and we sat at a booth, like a restaurant booth almost, on a train. We sat 2 on each side, but they kept on filling the train to the point where it was standing room only. And we had random people sitting in the booth with us. Someone was sitting on the table. People were standing on the aisles. There are people just like standing and sitting everywhere. There are people just like hanging out in the bathroom because no place else to go. But that was the train for like 6 hours. That was the ride. And we were just like scrunched, and that's the way it was. They just paid to get on the train. I had the other experience of actually booking a room on a train where there was, again, 4 of us, but there were beds in the train. And so you can go outside and walk in the lounge area, but you also had your own private room, so you had space, which is nice. And then we had to sleep on a train because it was a 9-hour ride. But in any case, folks, I've experienced both pretty nice, luxurious, and then just like what you would call steerage, like just very low class. They're very different experiences, like very, very different experiences. You get sick on the steerage class because everyone's sick and they're coughing and whatever else, but it's life. So, let's talk about what the railroads did wrong. Railroad wrongdoing. Railroad wrongdoing. Or, if you're an English speaker, railroad wrongdoing. Because that's what it looks like. You assume this says doing, but what if it was wrongdoing? Because it could be. Think of the word boing for a second. It's not Boeing. Boing. So doing. Anyway, railroad wrongdoing. Here's some of the things that railroads did wrong. First off, stock watering. Let's talk about cows. But that's what the term refers to. If you're going to buy a cow at the market, or a bull, how do you decide how much to pay for that bull? By weight. So let's say I'm the person selling the bulls today, and I want to get the most out of my bulls. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed that bull as much salt as I can. And then what's going to happen to that bull? He's going to get thirsty. So what's he going to do? He's going to drink a lot of water. And then I'm going to send him off to the auction, and when you buy that bull, a lot of what you're paying for is what? Water weight. Is it all meat? No. So are you lying about the value of the bull? That's called stock watering. Make sense? With railroads, they lied about the value of their railroads. So in stock watering with regard to railroads, what they did was they lied about the value of the railroads. Because let's say you're an investor. You want to invest in Mr. King's Railroad Company. Are you going to come all the way out west to see if my railroad is actually doing well? No, I'm going to write you reports, and I'm going to say, hey, man, our railroad is doing amazing. You should give me another $1 million, and I will keep expanding this very successful railroad. In fact, it's so good, I'll sell it to you because I'm making so much money, and I'll write you this report. And I say, you know what, this railroad is probably actually worth like $3 million. Oh, yay. Just leave them in the right next to that wall. You have to put it inside. It's right there. What was I talking about? Oh, right. So, sorry. I have, again, things you should know about me, folks. I have a terrible short-term memory. I will remember, like, all of U.S. history, but because I'm already thinking about the next point I have to cover, if you interrupt me in the middle of a lecture, I might be like, wait, what? Even mid-sentence, I may not know what I was talking about. Because I'm thinking like 3 steps ahead already. But I have to make sure the story still flows. So when you interrupt me, I'll be like, let's start all over. So the idea is that I'm trying to sell you a railroad, and it's worth millions, I say, but it's actually failing. But am I going to admit that it's failing? No, I'm going to lie about it so I can sell it to you at a higher price. So that's stock watering. Make sense? You lie about the value of a railroad to sell it for a higher price, let's say. Cool. Next thing they did wrong, pools. Pools are also bad. Not swimming pools, but pools. Let me define pools first. A pool is when several companies, or when companies cooperate and create a monopoly. So again, a pool is when companies cooperate and create a monopoly. Now here's my question. What's a monopoly?
It's when you sell something so low that the other business will go out of business. Because they can sell anything.
A monopoly, by definition, folks, is when you are the only business in an industry. Okay? So, for example, who in this room has a monopoly on teaching?
No, Mr. King.
I do, right? If there were multiple teachers in this room, would I have a monopoly on teaching?
No.
No. Does Doubles have a monopoly on hamburgers in La Puente? No, it does not. Because are there multiple hamburger places in La Puente? Does that make sense, folks? A monopoly is if you're the only one. Good so far? Okay. These companies wanted to cooperate to create a monopoly. So they're multiple, but they want to pretend to be a monopoly. Then they raise prices and split the profit. So they create a monopoly, raise prices, and split the profit. They raise prices and split the profit. Let me explain how this works. Suppose Jack in the Box, McDonald's, Carl's Jr., all decide, and In-N-Out all come together and say, hey man, we are charging so little for our items. Like some of us are charging as low as 99 cents. Are they making a lot of money off that 99-cent menu?
Yeah.
They're not. They're making what, like 10 cents tops off that 99-cent menu? Do you think they want to charge 99 cents?
No.
No, but they have to charge 99 cents because is the other guy charging 99 cents? So they really have no choice. So they say, this is ridiculous. Why are we competing amongst ourselves? Instead of us competing with each other, let's work together. And instead of charging 99 cents for anything, starting tomorrow, all the burger places are going to charge $20. And if you want a burger in La Puente, and assuming you can't go anywhere else, you have to pay $20. And so, are the burger companies now going to profit? A lot. Because by working together, are they going to compete? No, and they can make as much money as possible. And is that bad for you guys? Yeah, so that's how a pool works. Let me explain how it works with the railroad. Let's say you live in Nebraska. And here's your town. And in Nebraska, let's say there are 3 railroads. You're a farmer, so in order to survive, do you have to sell your goods? Yes, right? You need to be able to sell your products in order to survive. And so in order to sell your goods, though, you're going to have to use what? Railroads. Now, each of these railroads, do they want you to use their railroad? Yeah, you have railroad A, B, and C, right? A, B, and C. So railroad A says, hey, $20. Use mine for $20. B is like $15. C is like $10. So are they competing for your business? And by lowering their prices, are they making less profit? Eventually, they're all going to charge $10, right? But if they say, whoa, railroad A, B, and C, what are we doing? What if instead of competing, we say, hey, we don't care which one you use, it's all going to cost $300, no matter which railroad you use. Do I still have to sell my products? So now I have to pay $300, but is each individual railroad still going to make more money off this monopoly? Yeah, because before I was only going to make 10. Now I don't care which one you use. I'm going to make $100. Does that make sense to everyone? Those are pools. They're illegal. You're not allowed to do that because it's bad for who? The common man or the consumers. It's bad for you guys. Airplanes try to do this all the time. United and American Airlines just merged. And the concern is because there's fewer airlines now, our prices going to be higher or lower? Higher. Less competition means higher prices. That's not necessarily a good thing. The other thing they did wrong, rebates or kickbacks. Well, not really the rebates, but secret rebates. What's a rebate, folks? If you go to Office Depot and you buy a computer and say, oh, you qualify for a rebate. What does that mean?
Money back.
You're going to get money back. That's always nice, right? Getting money back. But here's the thing. What if that rebate was a secret? At Office Depot, does everyone get that rebate if everyone buys that one computer? Everyone gets it, right? No matter who you are. But what if that rebate was only given to certain people? What if I said, hey, if you're going to buy food from the cafeteria, everyone pays the exact same amount, but only some of you get a rebate back at the end of the week, right? You're going to hey, thanks for buying all that food. Here's $5. Thanks. Would you guys be happy if you were not getting that rebate? Well, Mr. King, how come they're getting the money and I'm not? Well, it's a secret. Wouldn't you want to know why these people were getting rebates? Well, what happened was that railroads were giving large businesses rebates, but not for farmers. So railroads were giving large businesses rebates, but they were not giving rebates to farmers. Why might we be giving rebates to large businesses?
Because they have a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, are they going to use our railroads a lot more?
Yes.
And do we want to keep them happy? Sure. So we're going to give discounts to large railroads. Are we going to give discounts to small farmers? You don't use my railroad enough. So, for example, if you're going to buy chicken, one chicken, let's say a chicken costs $300. Chickens are expensive, let's say. But if you're going to buy 1,000 chickens, are you going to get a good deal? That's kind of the idea. Except the problem here is that that deal wasn't public. No one knew how one was going to get a rebate. It was kind of a backhand deal with oil companies saying, hey, if you ship all your oil through my railroad, I'll give you 10% back. Versus if you told that to a farmer, hey, use my railroad, but no deals. That's not fair, folks. So are farmers upset here? They're being screwed. Pools, rebates, stock watering, they're not happy about any of that. And so they sue. And this case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court case of Munn v. Illinois, the Supreme Court rules that states can regulate interstate commerce. But specifically, what are they allowed to regulate? Railroads. And the reason why this is a victory for states is that who has a lot of influence over their individual states? The farmers do. The farmers have a lot of influence over their individual states, so can the farmers now get their states to pass laws to regulate the railroads? That's a benefit. Because is the federal government listening to the farmers right now? No, they're being ignored. But if the states can regulate these railroads, might they be able to change the rules? There's a lot of benefit here in 1877, Munn v. Illinois. The problem, though, is that in 1886, in Wabash v. Illinois, the Supreme Court says, actually, we were wrong about that. And they ruled, nope, just kidding. Only the federal government can regulate interstate commerce. And this is a loss for who? Farmers. Because again, do they have any power over the federal government? Unfortunately, not. So you might be saying to yourself, well, Mr. King, these two Supreme Court cases sound so similar. How will I ever remember which one's which? Well, folks, I have a mnemonic device for you. Here's Munn and here's Wabash. Okay. First off, you might think, well, how will I know which one comes first? Well, luckily, they're alphabetical order. Munn comes first, Wabash comes second. That's nice. So if you can't remember which order, alphabetically they go. But let's say you can remember one but can't remember the other. Well, if you take the M and you flip it over, it becomes a W. So Munn and Wabash. So if you can't, or if you have the W, flip it over, it becomes an M. They're mirror images of each other. So if you kind of remember these cases together, that helps. But if you're thinking, well, Mr. King, I got that. I got Mun and Wabash, but I can't remember which one's state and which one's federal. I got you covered. You see the small space up here? I think that's just big enough to fit a state. But you see this giant space down here? My goodness. It looks like you can fit the entire federal government in there. So that's how you remember Mun and Wabash. It's an M, you flip it over, it's a W. Mun, it's an inverse, alphabetical, and then states and federal. Anyway, who's now responsible for regulating railroads? Federal government. So the last thing is the federal government creates the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887. And what this tries to do is it tries to regulate railroads. Its goal is to regulate railroads. In fact, the goal is to ban pools, rebates, and stock watering. It's supposed to regulate railroads. It's supposed to ban pools, rebates, and stock watering. What's happening in this cartoon? Yeah, like these railroads are like wild bulls, and we have to rein them in. Is the idea? Anyway, folks, that's it for today.